Just say welcome to those who are coming into the Zoom space today for the next Coastal and Marine Science and Management seminar series. I'm really excited to turn this over to Shauna to introduce Aulani Wilhelm. Aulani, welcome. And I want to just say, as Center Director, I'm really happy to have someone of your knowledge and your background with us today. We're very lucky, and I'm just really pleased to welcome you. And so, Shauna, please take it over and please introduce Aulani.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining today for our fourth seminar in this series. So it's an honor to introduce our speaker, Aulani Wilhelm, the perfect speaker to celebrate Earth Day today. Aulani is the Senior Vice President for Oceans at Conservation International, where Aulani bridges culture, community, science, and innovation to protect the oceans at a global scale and conduct work that is essential to the future of ocean health. Playing a pivotal role in the design of large-scale marine parks, notably, Aulani was key in establishing the Papahānaumokuākea Marine National Monument in Hawaii, the biggest marine protected area in North America. She also founded Big Ocean, a network of managers and partners of existing and proposed large-scale marine managed areas, collectively protecting more than 11 million kilometers squared of the global ocean. So with that, I am thrilled to welcome Aulani Wilhelm with her talk, High Seas, Coral Reefs, Conservation Gateways for the Largest Portion of Our Ocean.
Thank you so much, both of you. That was way too kind. I have to ask whoever sent my bio to make that a lot shorter next time. That's really kind. Thank you, everybody. I'm really excited to be here, and thanks for inviting me to join the seminar series. It looks like you folks really talk about some incredible things. And as Shauna said, that I think that what I wanted to talk to you about today is really a part of our ocean that seems a little bit far away. People don't know what to do with that big part of the ocean. And so what have we learned over the years from the establishment and management of large-scale MPAs that I think can be useful as a strategy for how we can start to practically and tangibly protect large portions of our high seas. And so my intention is not to take up the space with a presentation, so I'm gonna try not to kill you too much with a PowerPoint. I do have some notes, and the purpose of my notes is to keep me to discrete points because, and hi Mary, it's nice to see you and some other friends. People who know me, brevity is not what I'm known for. So I'm using my notes to not kill you with PowerPoint and to actually move through some talks, and some main points, and it's intentionally non-technical. And I think anybody, again, who knows my work, I really try to take the best of what is out there, what experts are coming up with, whether it's biophysical or social science or local community knowledge, and be practical and move that forward. And so I really just want to have a conversation about this and hear from you folks about what, of what I'm sharing makes sense, what's confusing, what other ideas do you folks have, because that's really how we can kind of grow our collective practice of conservation and moving forward. So I'm hoping that you'll dig in with me. So with that, my pictures are way more interesting than staring at me. So let me share my screen. And we'll get started with a presentation. Can everybody see the screen? Is that good? Okay, awesome. So coral reefs of the high seas, we'll start there. So growing up in Hawaii, although I'm calling you from New Zealand, where my husband is from, that's why it's a little bit colder here, and you'll see the sunrise behind me. But growing up in Hawaii, 2,500 miles from our nearest neighbor, I'd say that the vastness of the ocean is pretty native to me. As a child, I learned that my Polynesian ancestors really arrived on deep sea voyaging canoes, not unlike this one, using really only nature to find their way across the world's largest ocean. The open ocean, what we now call the high seas, is what connected us, right? It was our ancestral pathways, both to and from our relatives. But I realized that this perspective isn't shared by most. For the most part, the high seas are a pretty esoteric notion, right? Something that feels really far away from us, which is why I think for so long we've treated it the way we do, like an endless source to take from, and quite frankly, to take for granted. And we know that laws and regulations governing its protection are few and basically insufficient for what we need to do. Science, now consensus science, is now telling us that for people and the planet to have a fighting chance, against the confluence of climate change impacts and other human impacts, that we need to effectively protect at least 30% of our oceans. So today, I think no matter what metric you use, it's clear that not nearly enough is protected, probably no more than 8% at best. So we can't really do that goal. We can't achieve that goal of 30 by 30 until we do a better job of the high seas. Because if you just do the math, we're not going to reach 30 by 30 in national jurisdictions. We really have to look at the high seas, which cover almost half of our planet. And it's the largest portion of our oceans, as you all likely know, in both size and volume, but are really still highly misunderstood and under and unprotected. That's kind of where it gets tricky, right? And I don't just mean legally or scientifically, and I'll explain. So this is kind of how most people think about the high seas, right? A vast open emptiness, a place few people have ever been or will likely ever go, right? But they're far from empty, despite repeatedly being called the deserts of the ocean. We've known actually for a long time that the high seas encompass highly diverse and productive ecosystems, both in the water column and on the seafloor, including highly productive pelagic ecosystems, hydrothermal vents, methane seeps, and lots of coral communities. The high seas encompass over 70% of the total space that is inhabitable to life on Earth. So wouldn't it be logical then that these places are home not to few, but to extraordinary diversity of life? And high seas are also an interconnected set of places. And that's something, again, that I think we have to really get our mind around. It's just not the vastness of nothing, that yes, while they're covered with water, these areas are places. But we don't think about them that way, again, because they're underwater. But if we drain them of water, right, what would we find? We'd find hillsides and marshes and canyons and high valleys and mountains and plateaus, just like we do on land, that we find completely amazing. But we don't live there. So we don't differentiate them. We don't give them names. We don't really, from a cultural perspective, in the way I was raised, really breathe life into really recognizing the mana, the deep spiritual value that they contain. So in order to protect these remote places, I think we really have to change people's perceptions about the high seas. We also have to make tangible what protecting the high seas could mean, right? Why people should care, and provide ways for the global community to engage. So how do we do that? Well, I'd submit that we start with special places that people can relate to. So the terms coral reef and high seas are rarely combined in the same sentence, right? Most people assume that coral reefs only occur in shallow water areas within national boundaries, the place that we like to sit beside on the sand with our beer in our lounge chair, right? Or at least we like to go there in our minds. But coral reefs, the same species we find in shallow waters, can occur in habitats within 150 meters of the surface of the ocean in tropical places like these. So people are stunned that these aren't kind of the ones that we just walked out into the shallows to see. Termed mesophotic coral reef ecosystems, these corals occur in the twilight zone of the ocean, right? Deeper than what can be reached by scuba and shallower than what's typically assessed by submersibles, something you probably are all already aware of. They're some of the most undersurveyed of all ocean systems because they're not protected by any laws of any country, and therefore they're among the most vulnerable and potentially overexploited reefs on the planet. Where mesophotic reefs have already been studied, research has found that high levels of endemism occur, outrageously high, up to 100%. Low levels of invasive species, in many cases zero, and early evidence that there are possibly refugia areas that we've been looking for, right? These ones that for the species in shallow areas that are damaged or even lost altogether due to rapid and prolonged rises in sea surface temperature, there's early evidence that these same species are there. And so will they create refugia for those species that are being challenged or even wiped out in places that we're used to seeing them? Early research also indicates that these reefs and seamounts provide habitat for critical food fisheries and resilience to climate change as reserves, special reserves of biodiversity. As such, these mesophotic coral ecosystems have been identified by IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, as a top research and conservation priority. So I think these twilight reefs hold significant potential and should be prioritized when considering where we might establish high seas MPAs. And so why do I think this is possible? Well, for one, I think it's just basic, right? People love coral reefs. We do. We get excited about them. We want to go protect them, even if we've never been there. We get really moved when we see extraordinary coral reefs. We love them, and that's proven in how people respond and what has actually changed public perception over the years. And people love reefs, of course, much more than perceived emptiness, right? The photo I showed you earlier, how most people think of the high seas. Or they prefer coral reefs to things that just are strange or kind of seemingly unknown. So let's start with corals, because they have, as I mentioned, a long history of protection in lots of countries due to their direct economic, cultural, and social value for people. So in my opinion, we're already primed to care. And second, I think this is a strategic approach because I've seen it already happen, right? So starting 20 years ago, actually a little bit more now, makes me feel old, I helped to lead Hawaii's effort to protect the majority of the world's longest and most remote archipelago, a place we now refer to as Papahānaumokuākea. Its sheer size, an area bigger than the Great Barrier Reef at the time, was an anomaly. It was a first of its kind. People said we were absolutely nuts. And now it's actually becoming more and more normal, this idea of protecting large swaths of the ocean. And I'm proud to say that science has always played a role in protection of this extraordinary area. Exploration and the powerful, powerful images and stories that they've conjured have put a face on these extraordinary islands, undersea reefs, shoals, and all of their wonderful inhabitants. Exploration combined with storytelling moved people to call for government action. These interventions combined birthed a whole new genre of very large ocean conservation. And I really do believe from this experience that the same thing can happen with the high seas. So this is what the original boundary of what we now call Papahanaumokuākea looked like 20 years ago. Early research strengthened protections and codified the boundaries 6 years later, got a little bit bigger. And then a decade later, pivotal findings from Mesophotic and deep water explorations, which found, one, the highest proportion of reef fish endemism known anywhere at the time on Earth, the longest living marine organism known on Earth, a giraffe-sized Gorgonian coral, and the largest known sponge on the planet, the size of a minivan, among many, many, many other things. But these findings specifically provided the scientific underpinning for what became a fourfold expansion of the boundaries in 2016 out to the full 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone limit. So Papahanaumokuākea is now 3.5 times the size of California. So because of my experience, I believe that so much of this is transferable to how we can begin to protect areas of the high seas, focusing on the direct link between ocean stability and planetary stability in the face of climate change, and how to bring character, again, voice, personality to an area in a way that rallies the global community, the hearts and minds of people to connect with and really care about these open ocean areas that are not so different from Papahanaumokuākea, except they exist outside that national boundary line. So how do we find the most promising places that to protect that might fit these criteria? I think we start with seamounts, mountains on the seafloor that all of you know, but don't reach the surface. So based on existing mapping data from satellites and echo sounders, we know that the high seas are far from barren, as I said before. There are over 170,000 seamounts and knolls full of life. Using the seafloor mapping data, habitat suitability models, and historic specimen collections, we've identified 4 areas. Does that show 4? Yeah, 4 areas on the high seas that are most likely to host these mesophotic coral reef ecosystems, the kind of systems we're used to. Not surprisingly, each of these areas lay between or next to other large-scale marine protected areas that have already been established or proposed by countries that already understand the need for sustainably managed and well-protected ocean areas. So where countries have had the ability to protect other offshore marine spaces, they have, and these are the areas adjacent to those highly protected areas that just lie in the high seas. So let's see. Now my screen is stuck. So anyway, there we go. By proving the ecological connectivity between these high seas areas and already protected waters, I think we have a real good shot at beginning to build that scientific rationale that we need to protect more and more high seas areas, protections that can complement and supplement those protections that are already in place. So I want to zoom in on one of these areas, the Sala y Gomez, or the combined Sala y Gomez Nazca ridges off of the coast of Chile. From the map, you can see, right, when you take out all the other noise, the incredible undersea seamount chain that is there, this ridge. Its habitat that exists on the convergence of the Humboldt Current, the Intertropical Convergence Zone, and lots of other unique oceanographic conditions that make this area truly extraordinary and unique in the world. And again, not surprisingly, it lies between areas that Chile has already taken, the Chilean government has already taken action to try to begin to protect. This area has both natural and cultural heritage features that are important to protect, right? This area is adjacent to Rapa Nui, or Easter Island, has a long history of maritime heritage and sailing and commerce through this area. So both on the natural and cultural, there's just a richness here to bring to life and to share with people that I think we've forgotten about. As this picture suggests, the area also boasts incredible biodiversity. At least 25 species of sharks and rays, 21 species of birds, 16 species of coral, the list goes on and on. Marine mammals, marine turtles, sea cucumbers, bony fishes. It's extraordinary, like many of these places that we're trying to bring voice to. And it's really because of this extraordinary set of resources that it has earned already national and international distinctions. Ecologically or biologically significant marine area. It's an EBSA, in fact, as well. And I think these distinctions were achieved even prior to some of our more recent deep sea expeditions prior to COVID that continue to basically reveal new and endemic species that were previously unknown to science, right? It's one of these areas never been explored before. Every time you go, you find extraordinary stuff. So we knew this place was awesome before, and now that we're getting into the deep sea, we're realizing more and more just how incredibly awesome it actually is. And some of those findings also include recent confirmation that it contains the deepest light-dependent reefs who have adapted over time and now thrive in these really light-poor ecosystems. So let's pull back and look at the region from a bird's eye view again. The good news is that when you look at, hey, how could we protect this place? Really little fishing occurs in this area, according to the latest data that we pulled from Global Fishing Watch. There also is no deep sea or seabed mineral exploration. And it also, when you overlay ship traffic, it's not a major ship transit area. So that's all good news. But we also know that additional pressures can only come, right, due to increased exploitation and our kind of insatiable need and demand as a global population for seafood. So the trajectory and of continued pressure is probably still high. And from a climate perspective, we know using an aggregated vulnerability indicator that includes temperature, acidification, and deoxygenation, that when you put that together, compared to areas outside of the boundary, this area is at higher risk. So it means that really reducing and preventing future human pressures is critical to enable the highest levels of resilience against all of these threats, those from climate, but also the food threats. The ecological value of this area is well established. And relatively speaking, as I've shown on the maps, that economic pressures are arguably manageable, at least right now. But climate pressures, and again, that insatiable demand for seafood that we have, are increasing the vulnerability of this special area. So we have a chance here where it's still in pretty good shape and there's not a lot of threats. So how can we get ahead of that, like we've done in large scale areas within national boundaries, to really do our best to stave off that rapid decline that, if we look at the rest of the world, is pretty inevitable unless we take action. So, even with all of this information, though, the area remains unprotected, right? Logic and data aren't enough. We have this. It makes perfect sense to do it, but it's going to take a global village to do it, because out in the high seas, it's complicated. Like, I borrowed this slide from a friend trying to explain to me how it all works under the law of the sea. And most of us probably on this call work in the space of oceans. And it is nutty to try to figure out how to look at the high seas, to look at all the conventions, to look at all the UN mechanisms, to understand how they interact and interplay with each other, to really figure out how do you do anything, right? It's super, super complicated. So our approach has been that Conservation International has been leading a Coral Reefs of the High Seas Coalition, an interdisciplinary alliance of diverse partners to advance this work. We really recognize that if we build on the experience of large-scale MPAs and we bring together the best of what science has with policy and design, MPA design from a practical standpoint, along with good communications to be able to drive that, to provide what decision makers need, that's probably our best fighting chance. So we're coalescing to contribute to a special piece. There's lots and lots of people working on the high seas, and it's really, really important. And I'm grateful for all the work that all of our partners have been doing. And this particular piece that we're coalescing around is really, how do we bring a practical design, right? Take all that great information and practically say, listen, this is that place. Here's what it's like. Here's its voice. Here, give it character and actually a tangible proposal for what could be done to protect this area now. So, not to bore you with too many details, but we're recommending really 4 things. And right now it's using different pieces of that spaghetti or that crazy decision-making tree of UN policies. That one is what exists now are regional fishery management organizations. So one of the things is, how can we restrict or actually just keep fishing levels as they are and utilize existing mechanisms through the 2 RFMOs that really would have jurisdiction over this area. Another is to restrict seabed mining into perpetuity via the International Seabed Authority. Another is, if the biodiversity beyond national jurisdictions negotiations, the BBNJ treaty discussions or convention discussions continue and are actually effectuated, perhaps we can be ready to actually bring forward a proposal to create a truly high seas protected area using this new mechanism that doesn't yet exist, but lots and lots of people are pushing for that to happen. So we're just keeping an eye on that and being ready if we are able to utilize a new mechanism. And the other is to use a variety of those mechanisms to really address marine pollution in that area. So those are kind of the 4-pronged main interventions that the coalition is really looking at. So to open up discussion, maybe I can just say that in summary, I really do believe that understanding and protecting high seas coral reefs may prove to be one of the most effective things that we can do to secure ocean resilience and food security, and really help us as a global community reach those conservation targets like 30 by 30 for the future. Again, we're not going to do it in national jurisdictions alone. We have to do it in the high seas. But in my opinion and experience, it's really hard to get people to kind of wrap their arms around 64% of the ocean, right? It doesn't mean something. So how do we make it real and tangible so people really who are already primed to care want to care a little bit more, right? You wouldn't be listening to this talk if you didn't already understand and are participants in the science and the great work that is happening to really, increase global understanding that we live on an ocean planet, right? That all living systems on Earth are driven by what happens and is happening to life under the surface, right? That's why you guys got into this field. That's why you folks are doing this great work, is because we recognize that. And changes to the ocean are what's driving changes to the planet. So how do we bring our work together collectively? How do we share that to really help other people who aren't in this field really understand that? If you want to protect the planet, we need to really make sure that we have a stable ocean and really protect as much as we can, as quickly as we can, but smartly, right? And meaningfully. We don't want to put up paper dragons. We don't want to have things and pretend that we're protecting. We want to be able to design and create marine protected areas, conservation areas, I don't care what you call them, better fishery management areas. I always tease my colleagues, just call them purple potatoes. Who cares what they're called? Just make them work, make them real, make them tangible, have them be successful so we can do more and more of it. Because if all of our science is right, then protecting the ocean is going to have that direct human benefit. But we need to be able to get there so that people who don't spend their lives and careers doing this can really feel and understand, and their lives can be changed by doing a better job protecting our oceans. So, we all know, again, we wouldn't be here on this call if we didn't, that we need our oceans for so many reasons. And now, right in this confluence of crises that we found ourselves in on the planet, that we need the ocean even more. So I encourage everyone to be wayfinders, to help ourselves and each other and really the world through this. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you folks have some thoughts and some ideas. I'd really love to bring what your ideas, your energy, your science to be part of this, or really any of the work that we're doing to really do to do much better to protect this extraordinary planet. Thanks so much. Anybody want to talk about anything?
Yep.
I tried not to, I tried to leave plenty of space to talk. I really want to just open up the conversation. I'm curious what questions you folks have. I'm curious what challenges you might have to any of this theory or just whatever. And hey, Jack, nice to see you. It's been a long time since yesterday. No, hi, Jack. Thoughts?
Aulani, I guess I'll try to kick it off. Thank you. That was fabulous. And I do know much of the crowd here, and I know that it resonates with what you're saying, resonates with them quite well. I have a question just to kick it off about the 4 recommendations were super helpful to me, who doesn't work in this space. And I see the 4 recommendations that you got to, and it really reduces, in my mind, in some ways, the complexity that you were showing is so overwhelming. Of the 4 recommendations, which ones are sort of front and center at this point in your effort, and which ones are a little more back burner, or is that not the case?
No, I mean, we're practical people, right? This coalition, and part of bringing a coalition of organizations that do different things, you have different people tracking and really digging in on different pieces. But from a time standpoint, we've already taken a scientific proposal on what is the rationale and justification. It's a collective. I mean, I don't know how many scientists collaborated, but far more than 20. It was really an extraordinary effort. And we took a proposal to SPRETMO, the South Pacific Regional Fishery Management Organization already. So we're already in the queue. We're already in the queue for more discussions to be able to take place. And we're using their process, right? Going through what is their process. And we got really great feedback. They said it was one of the best scientific proposals that committee had seen. We tried to do a really good job. The great thing is that the collaborators are really top of their game in this and put not only really great synthesized data that had already been compiled when EBSA recommendations had come through. This is not an area that's unknown in many ways, but the Mesophotic and deeper reef data is newer. So that was a nice overlay and people got really excited. I mean, I don't mean to sound too weird about this, but it's about building community around this, community of researchers, community of policymakers, community of people who care and want to actually move that. And that's what I've seen in this coalition is scientists got together and we're really building these collaborations, and they're not closed, right? You want to be part of this thing? Great. It's a community. It's open source. How do people bring what they have and their ideas to it? So that's one thing I'm excited about. We're tracking the work in the ISA. That'll be a different trajectory and probably a longer burn to look at how do you really keep what isn't happening there from happening there. It's probably not quite as urgent as trying to figure out an existing mechanism. And then there's many, many people and organizations that are part of the coalition that have been dogged and have been leaders in trying to get the BB&J negotiations to happen. That's not us. We're leading this coalition to design MPA, kind of the practitioner side, but they're doing their work. And we're kind of, until there is a convention, we can't really use that mechanism. So if it does come on board, we're going to be ready, right? We already have a proposal through the regional fishery management councils. We can easily adjust that based on whatever the final design and set of mechanisms will be under any BB&J convention that comes out. Looks like a lot of it would happen through the existing regional bodies anyway. So we feel like talking to the fishery management organizations and helping them figure out, where this meets what their mandates and missions are is probably a good step forward, right? What we don't want to do is villainize anyone, right? It's that this is an extraordinary place, right? Let's use science and information and figure out how shared possibilities and goals can move forward. And the last bit is, there's lots of pieces of the IMO that work on marine pollution. Squishy, it's one of those squishier areas, but it also is one of the areas that move a lot of people and that have the deepest teeth in terms of being able to do something about bad actors, right? So that's just an important thing, probably from my experience in any ocean area that you think about pollution, because some of the strongest laws that exist today actually are to drive action on marine pollution. So those are just nice kind of important ways. And we've done that with Papahānaumokuākea, some of the strictest water quality rules and laws, and ones that actually can have teeth. So it's just kind of a good strategy, I think, overall, again, just based on my experience.
I have a question.
Go for it.
So I can't really wrap my head around how or what the process is for establishing a protected area on the high seas. Like, what is that, a UN decision, or did just nearby countries have to decide together? How does it all get? How would they get?
So that's hence the confusion about all of this. I think that's why we're so slow to be able to protect the high seas. The current mechanisms right now is through the regional fishery management organizations, and that's the piece where most high seas advocates agree that it's insufficient. The mechanisms that exist right now are insufficient to protect the high seas. So they're limited mechanisms, and it's not that different than how it's been historically in countries. And many countries still don't have mechanisms to do this in their own waters, right? Until there is a mechanism, national or international, it's difficult. So the two things I was just talking about, one, that there are already regional fishery management organizations whose job are to govern basically extraction, right? And there's the International Seabed Authority that of extraction of fish, kind of fishing industry, or industries. And then there's the Seabed Authority that looks at seabed exploration, right? So those are the two regulating kind of bodies right now that exist. There's efforts to create another convention called Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdictions that last year, pre-COVID, everybody had there was some really positive momentum and people felt really good that there was a potential that the discussions and dialogues were going to go well, and we would result in a new convention that would actually allow, through whatever mechanisms came out through the dialogues, a mechanism or multiple mechanisms to do this, right? So those discussions have stalled. They're not closed, but they haven't been successful yet, and COVID changed the world a little bit. So we're waiting. If a mechanism like that comes through, then we'll have a clearer way to be able to design and take proposals like this. So our coalition's kind of just looking at all opportunities and kind of hedging any of the opportunities and working where there are existing mechanisms and tracking where there might actually be new ways to protect the high seas. It's totally confusing. You are not alone with why this is so difficult to do. And yet it's something that we have to do because we're not going to reach those global goals, and we're not going to protect the ocean in the way that it needs using existing mechanisms. They're insufficient. That's why these are some of the most unprotected and vulnerable resources and ecosystems on the planet. And because they're unknown, people don't care about them. They don't think that they're unprotected because they don't think they need protection. They don't understand that it's just like, you know, areas within national boundaries, or if you drained, or if you added water to the Grand Canyon and filled it up with life, it'd be very similar. But people, we don't think like that. We're land people, right? So we have a really hard time understanding that.
Aloha, Aulani. It's Clifford Kapono. Nice to hear your voice
Hey,
this morning.
how's it?
Good.
Nice to hear your voice.
Yeah, I had a question about, are there any resources maybe available or potentially some suggestions about how to communicate to maybe a smaller demographic of individuals who maybe have larger influences over society in combating, say, protection, and when this idea of protection is put forward in, say, a 30 by 30 bill, how to effectively communicate. I just ran into a personal problem as I was a part of a campaign with the World Surf League to promote a 30 by 30 petition taken to the UN, which met extreme opposition from private organizations in California because they were confused that this 30 by 30 idea was the AB 3030 legislation, which didn't get passed in California, which everyone thought was the MLPA, California 2.0, big issues with you know, recreational fishing, and really from a privileged demographic of individuals, you know, the 40-year-old wealthy white man who doesn't get to fish marlin off of California anymore. How do we, are there resources, or are there ways we can better communicate to these people who have tremendous influence, whether they're part of the AFCO, Hubs, research station, wherever it is? How can we be better advocates for not just the science, but this idea that we have issues in what we define as protection, but this potentially can help us to work through that as well? Mahalo.
Yeah, you never ask those easy questions, Cliff. You always ask the ones that go straight to the heart. I mean, right, what you're talking about is actually the art of conservation, right? Science doesn't get us there. This is the people part, right? People are messy. We're like horribly messy. We're horribly like conflicted. We're fickle. There's all kinds of things, right? And so this is the part that's hard, and why, you know, even in this example that I gave, it's like a no-brainer that this place should be protected, right? Everything's lined up, and it's not a hot spot for any of the kind of, it shouldn't draw kind of people to say no, but it does, either because it's different. People are like, what is that? And they don't even understand why you need to do it, or because there are people with the feeling like, hey, any change in any part of the ocean means eventually I'm not going to be able to catch that marlin or mahi-mahi off of California, right? There are people kind of wired that way, that you're going to lose ground and that you can't lose any ground. And then there are also people who feel like they need to be asked first, right? How come you never asked me? So these are just, I mean, and I think if we employed a little bit more of that kind of psychology to the way we do conservation, we could be a smarter, more effective community. I think a lot of times, because the way that we're often trained and wired is like logic should matter, science should matter, right? But it's actually not data sheets that change the world. It's people armed with data sheets and information that can go and have those conversations, right? So, and I also think it's a mix of trying to aim at the movable middle. I learned this a long time ago. You cannot move, no need move the people that are already moved, right? In fact, we don't really need to talk to each other anymore. We're there, right? I mean, we should, because it's lovely, but we don't need to, right? This is not the crowd that I have to convince you guys to go protect the high seas, right? You guys are already primed. But we're probably not gonna get those guys, right, Cliff? The guys that are just like, this is me, it's all about me, I'm gonna catch my fish, it's my right to fish. I'm not sure where that right's codified, but it's deeply codified in the minds of people who hold that belief. You got to go for the people in the middle, right? And try to do that. And I think it's a counter strategy. And this is the other thing is, you know, conservation, a lot of times we get into it because we love these places, and getting hyper political feels like we have to take 25 showers when we go home. But the truth is, it is political. And while we're busy kind of arguing sometimes about the differences in our science or the differences in our approaches, people are happy that we're keeping ourselves busy, right? Because they're out there, hey, while you guys are arguing with your kind of, you know, wonderful view of the universe, we're just going to be out here doing our thing, right? Keep kind of being distracted. And I got to admit, like when we first started this thing called large scale MPAs, we didn't know that that's what we were doing. Some of the biggest criticism we got was from within the conservation community, right? People are like, I mean, couldn't understand, oh my God, you're going to take away from nearshore stuff, or oh my God, there's not the sign, you can't do it, there's not this, there's not that, and it doesn't, oh, but you're, you know, you're not including this, and it, you know, what are your indicator, you know, species, and what are you protecting against, right? I was like, ironic. Should have been like, yay, that guy, you're totally crazy, but go with your crazy, we'll be right back over here, kind of just keeping up, but go hard. Right? We need to try everything as much as we can. So, and I'm not getting exactly to how to, I heard about this WSL thing, by the way, and it shocked me too, right? You're just like, but that's where following the money, and that's where the political piece actually counts. And sometimes I think we have to get ahead of that by actually trying to follow money before we take an action, right? Just, and sometimes we can take the action anyway, but at least you go in knowing that there may be people who are gonna have blowback. But if you are able to do a political strategy as part of that, you might have, I mean, I'm not saying you in this particular, but we, when we think about these things, sometimes we can stave off some of that by assuming that there will be blowback. And that's where, again, this instinct, and I see it on my team, and, you know, Jack can attest to this, that this instinct is often to see the positives. We're primed in conservation to kind of believe in the opportunities. And I love opportunities, but I open up the closet and look for boogies first, right? Always. You have to open up the closet. You have to poke around and see what's over there. And then you can go on to the opportunity. Because if you don't, we actually do it to ourselves a little bit. So I think part of that is just being in that it's not going to make sense. There are going to be people who don't want to do this, even if that makes no sense to us. And really try to anticipate that up front is the best I can offer, Cliff, is that it's not, I think it's always going to happen. There's always going to be someone you never predicted. But if we can get ourselves ready that there will be some of that, then at least we can maybe block and tackle a little bit up front. But you're never going to know. It always is wild to me. We just had this launch of our Blue Nature Alliance the other day, and like all this great accolades and people who, was that just yesterday? That feels like a lifetime ago already. 2 days ago, it was like, so much good. And then we had a couple of pieces that were critical, and I would have never anticipated that kind of blowback. I was just like surprised at where people were kind of not happy with our messaging and where we were moving it forward. So even when you prepare, people come out of nowhere and are going to have a different thing. And the main thing is, don't let them just stop you, right? Okay, hiccup. Hey, sorry that happened, and figure out a way around it. Figure out a different path, but don't let them stop it, right? Like that relentlessness, I think is necessary.
Awesome.
Sorry.
Mahalo. That was perfect. Mahalo nui.
Sorry, Hawaiian Portuguese, brevity, not my genetic capability.
Hi, Aulani. Great to hear from you.
Hi,
nice
Mary.
To see you.
Nice to see you.
I was really struck by the maps you showed of the human impacts, kind of focusing on Sally Gomez and how there are so few impacts there. It really resonated with some conversations we're having in Hawaii with 30 by 30 and whether or not these places that are relatively less touched should be included in the 30% by default. We've been kind of trying to brainstorm around like maybe a different designation for these places and what that means and how to convince people to protect a place that's like protected out of like by default almost. So I'm just kind of curious how that's come up in your work in the high seas and well in Papahanaumokuakea as well. Like what, how you kind of address the argument that it's it still deserves a designation, even if it's a different way of thinking.
Yeah, so I've been saying for 20 plus years, when people would say, what are you protecting Papahānaumokuākea from? Like, you don't always have to protect from something. You can protect for something, And the from something doesn't have to be right in front of you, right? Everything we said that we were worried about when we were just calling ourselves kind of the sentinel site, when we think and we see climate change coming, I mean, hello, we were a sentinel site for about 2 minutes, and then climate change was changing and it was upon us, right? So it didn't take long for those worries that things we're protecting for intrinsic value, we're protecting for ecosystem function, we're protecting for resilience. And those things that are at the immediate doorstep of other places are still coming. There's no place on the planet not experiencing in the ocean already the impacts of climate, right? Pick the face of it. We got lots of doctors on here. You guys know, I use your science to make this point. It's not my science, it's all of your science, right? You guys are saying this every day. And so how long will that be? By the time we get the thing protected, trust me, there will be more threats that are already now at the doorstep, right? But this mentality of conservation, so this is simplistic, but my view of the early days of marine conservation is like we took terrestrial conservation, we folded it over the high water mark, and we called it marine conservation. We didn't take into account the interconnections between lots and lots of systems, the dynamism of the ocean, the differences that the ocean don't have people out there. Like we didn't, because we were just trying, and there's nothing bad about that, right? Like we took cool stuff that we did on land and we tried to fold it over and do the same stuff in the ribbon, the little tiny ribbon of coastline. And we called that marine conservation, right? There's so much more in the ocean to kind of take on that you can't actually look at solutions that are inherently local to go farther into other areas that connect with global. When we protected Papahānaumokuākea, we didn't go, gosh, we want to start a new genre in marine protection, right? We want to actually like help drive this thing that will become 30 by 30. We want to have one of the largest marine, that wasn't on the radar. We want to, change up the global conversation, but it did. And you can do both. You can be inherently local and incredibly global if we're smart and at the same time, right? And it's different. Like, do you want to think local and act global? That's what I think we've been doing, is do things inherently local that end up having a global impact. In some cases, sometimes you need to have a global mindset to take a local action. You need both. It's not always one or the other. So, those threats are here. There's no place that is not happening already. Call it something different, but I think we're crazy if we're not trying to stave decline. Staving decline, like we said, I'd have lots of conversations with Randy Kosaki, right? We're not gonna see where the rest of our sanctuary sister sites, we're looking at trying to over time see improvement. We're just like, we just don't wanna see radical decline. That I will consider awesome, right? Because it is gonna decline. So you need to protect those good places too, or we're gonna have nothing, right? And so people think that that's kind of the chicken approach or whatever. I mean, I've been called lots of names in the history, it's all fine. But like, we're like the ones that are just protecting the easy stuff. Okay, none of it's easy. None of it's easy. They'd be like, oh, well, you guys got the low hanging fruit. I saw no fruit hanging on no low branch, ever. Okay, there's the ones that fell and died a long time ago because it was just a really bad strategy or whatever, and the stuff that's way up in the trees. There's no such thing as a low-hanging fruit in ocean conservation in my experience. It's all hard, it's all nearly impossible, but we gotta be hopeless dreamers and keen political strategists at the same time to be able to make stuff happen. I hope that answered your question, Mary. If you wanna talk about 30 by 30, I would in Hawaii, like, let's have a conversation. I'd love to talk about that, actually.
I would
stick
love
my nose in it.
talk about it more too. So yes, thank you so
Awesome.
much.
Send me a note. We'll set up a time, Mary. Would be
Okay,
great.
sounds good.
Who has cool science that can help us inform this or challenge what we're doing? That can say, you know what, that's a great theory, but you're going to fail. And here's some other things to consider. Who's doing that? We want that. Challenge us. Tell us this is crazy. Make it better. No? Okay.
I can jump back in, I guess. One of the other things I heard you touch on that really got me excited was in your proposal for Sally Gomez, the convening of the scientists around the data. I think more and more I'm learning that, you know, when we kind of get everybody together and share an understanding before we jump in, we have all that much more kind of enthusiasm and energy going forward. And that's been something else that's just been really inspiring in Hawaii, as well as kind of, you know, everybody coming together behind the data, and also, you know, kind of using the data as like a common language. And so, yeah, I don't know if you want to touch more on that, or like whether you see that as a vehicle for kind of addressing these, you know, these hard challenges that maybe don't even have solutions yet.
You know, I've seen a real change in my career, again, feeling like the old lady here, in my career in this space, right? Before it was like science, you just had to like compete against each other. You like the idea of co-authored papers, man, like that was especially what with lots and lots of authors, it's like a nutty idea. And the thought to talk to a manager, right? Before saying, I'm going to give you, we're going to answer your management questions. And when I was a manager and we'd have these things and talk to people, I'd be like, really? And what is that management driven question, right? Because you didn't actually talk to the managers. So there was this thing of like, we can't diminish our science by talking to the managers and they don't know anything. And the managers would be like, your science is useless. I need it in a time now. And it's like, don't tell me about 50 years from now and this hypothesis and whatever. I don't have time. Like, I need to make a decision now. Give me stuff that matters now, right? And both of those are true. And both of those are not true. And when the experience we had with Papahanaumokuākea was, you know, years of us sitting on the opposite side of tables, looking at each other like, you know, green-headed monsters or whatever, because we didn't understand each other. We had to actually, and so many of the words we were using were the same word, but meant totally different things, right? And so we need to figure that out and almost develop a decoding language and trust, right? To the point where we were finishing each other's sentences at the, you know, after several years going on, right? And you saw then it built younger scientists into that community that didn't kind of come of age with the same kind of combativeness and kind of competitiveness, but actually this idea of collaboration. I'm really proud if you look at the kind of community of practice, if you will, of many scientists that I don't even know now. Like I used to know everybody because there weren't that many people doing it. And now I'm like, I don't know if you are, but thank God for what you're doing because it's super important, right? But it's built a totally different way of coming together. It's a community of practice of our biophysical scientist friends. And then we did the same thing with human dimensions. And then we mixed them up. And now we're just kind of a community of practice of all, because you need people of all of these. And not that many people now, I think that is generational. I don't think you guys get into your science to like have it sit on a shelf. Oh no, I want to get into science and I want to have the best science, but I don't care if it does anything in the world. Of course not. You want it to matter. Right? And so how do we find these pathways for science to matter? And how do we make sure that everybody gets a piece of what they're aiming for and driving for and is understood, right? So it's been really cool to watch that. And as I see Jack on the screen, I mean, this is Jack's approach, right? Everything is in collaboration, everything, right? And collaborations are hard. Like, let's get it. We're messy, we're difficult, right? It's hard. And you're just like, oh my God, not another meeting, not another thing that we have to get consensus around. But look at the fruit that comes out when you do it that way. It's so much better. There's so much more to celebrate. You actually learn more because you're more apt to share when you're trusting each other and you're finding out, wow, you did that. You had that data set I didn't even know. That could totally strengthen what I'm doing. You have people working on such similar things that are right next door and are not actually sharing. And that was also cool when we're able to have scientists bring managers together that they're working on in different places, or managers bring scientists together that never knew each other. It actually is just so much better. And let's face it, it's just a better way to work, right? Isn't it just a happier way to exist on the planet when you're doing that and your work is mattering and you're celebrating and you're being challenged by your colleagues who are also friends to be better, not to be worse or to be like diminished for your research, but to actually be encouraged? It's just a better way to operate. It is so much better to be in conservation, marine conservation now than when I started in, it was like the marine conservation field used to say, we just like eat each other for lunch. That's the goal every day. Let's just go eat each other for lunch. And it's totally different now. That's not perfect, but it's so much better now. And I think for exactly what you're talking about, Mary, and, argue whatever that maybe there's diminished aspects to it, but I'll take the pluses way over anything that we may have lost in the equation moving forward. But it is one of I still think we wouldn't have had expansion, we wouldn't have had World Heritage, we wouldn't have had IMO, particularly sensitive sea area designation, without taking the time to build a strong and collaborative set of partnerships with our science colleagues. And those are extending now. I'm still working with the Alan Friedlanders of the world all over in different parts of the world now. Because once you build that pilina, once you build that trust with each other, you can just take that and not have to translate and do that all over again and just keep moving, right? And it's really cool to be able to do that.
Thanks, Aulani. I better wrap it up just because there's a few minutes left for the end of the hour. But thank you for that presentation, for the inspiring discussion. And if anyone has anything to follow up, please, I can connect you all. And yeah, please join again for our next seminar in a month, the 20th of May at 12 p.m.
Thanks again, you guys. Great to see many of you. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you so much.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.